moving right along, I wanted to meet Bruce Mizrach. Now, Bruce is a friend of NJPPN. He's been on our panels. He's been a speaker for us. And he's a professor of economics at Rutgers University. And I'd like you to help me welcome Bruce, who will be our discussant moderator for tonight's program. Thank you so much.
I have the honor tonight of introducing you all to Professor Joseph E. Stiglitz. Professor Stiglitz has received the two highest academic awards in our profession: the John Bates Clark Medal in 1979 for the best economist under the age of 40, and the Nobel Memorial Prize in 2001. His ideas inform us about so many issues, from banking crises to Obamacare. He has taught everywhere: Yale, Princeton, Stanford, MIT, Oxford, and now at Columbia, where he is a university professor. He entered the policy arena during the Clinton administration, where he served on the Council of Economic Advisors as both member and chairman. He stayed on in Washington until 2000 as chief economist of the World Bank. His recent work is focused on global poverty and inequality, and tonight he will talk about his new book, by my count, the 30th, The Great Divide. Please join me in welcoming Professor Stiglitz.
Pleasure to be here. Sometimes when you write something you get criticized, you feel good because you know somebody was at least paying attention. And about 10 days ago, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article complaining about my complaining about inequality. So I felt like I had gotten underneath their skin. Basically, they wanted there to be more inequality, and they knew I was wanting there to be less. What I want to do this evening is to talk a little bit about my book and some of the work I've been doing, focusing on the many dimensions of inequality, the causes and the consequences of inequality, and what we can do about it. It's become one of the big issues, and again, I feel one of the victories is that even it's become a bipartisan issue. The Republicans are talking about it as well as Democrats, and so it will be one of the big issues in this campaign. My own interest in inequality began when I was growing up in Gary, Indiana. I don't know how many know Gary, Indiana is an industrial town. Was an industrial town before it got de-industrialized. On the southern shores of Lake Michigan, it was the largest integrated steel mill founded in 1906, and so its rise and fall really traces out the history of industrialization and de-industrialization in the United States. I say it was a company town, and that's symbolized by the fact that the name Gary was named after the chairman of the board of U.S. Steel. It can't be much more of a company town than that. But when I was growing up, I saw enormous inequality, a lot of poverty, a great deal of racial discrimination, and episodic unemployment. As the economy went up and down, my classmates' parents were thrown out of work. The kind of picture of the economy that I saw, that I was taught when I went to graduate school, was markedly different from what I saw. I was taught that markets worked very well, and the term for those who study economics, they were Pareto efficient. They were a kind of perfection to them. And as I wrote in one of my essays, the autobiography, when I got the Nobel Prize, I said, if that was a view of the best of all worlds, I wanted to be in another world. And it motivated me, my growing up motivated me to write my thesis at MIT about inequality. That was not a fashionable topic then, and it hasn't been a fashionable topic until quite recently. In fact, a standard review in economics expressed by Bob Lucas, who got the Nobel Prize teaching at the University of Chicago, is basically that to talk about inequality was one of the most invidious things that one could do. It was poisonous. And echoing something that Mitt Romney said in the presidential campaign 4 years ago, if you remember, he said, you should only talk about inequality in quiet voices behind closed doors. And that, of course, was the view of the 1%. Well, the paper growing out of my thesis was published in a journal I'm sure most of you don't read, called Economist. And it didn't get quite the same readership as the article I wrote about 4 years ago in Vanity Fair. That article was called "Of the 1% for the 1%, of the 1% by the 1% for the 1%," echoing, of course, the Gettysburg Address. And it really summarized a lot about my views about inequality. It was about the extent to which inequality had grown in the United States, particularly the 1%, but not only how much was going to the top 1%, now more than a fifth of all income. And in the years after President Obama officially declared the end of the recession in 2009, 91% of all the gains in our economy in the following 3 years went to the 1%. So if you want to know why a lot of people didn't think the recession was over, it wasn't over for that. But it's also about the fact that inequality in the United States is, to a large extent, a result not of economic forces, but of our policies. And I'll come back to this theme over and over again. What I want to do this evening is to try to go over fairly quickly some of the major ways in which our understanding of inequality has changed over the last 5 years, 10 years. And there have been very dramatic changes in our understanding of inequality. The first has to do with what has happened in the United States and what the expectation was when I was growing up in this period of the golden age of capitalism. Simon Kuznets, who was another economist who got the Nobel Prize, had talked about how in the early stages of development, inequality typically grows. One part of the economy goes out, and the other people who are more able to take advantage of the new world grow faster than others, and the economy moves apart. But then he hypothesized, argued, on the basis of data, that in fact in the next stage, that inequality would come down. And the United States followed that pattern. Beginning in 1929, when inequality had reached a very high level, it started to fall. And it especially fell in the years after World War II. But then, contradicting what has subsequently been called Kuznets' law, in the United States and some other countries, inequality started to rise. And it rose to a level that had almost never been seen before. I don't know how many of you know, America prides itself about being exceptional. And one way in which we're exceptional is that we have the highest level of inequality of any of the advanced countries. And we achieved that in a remarkably short period of time, 35 years. So that raises the question, what happened in 1980? Around 1980. Well, not arbitrarily. There are actually two different theories about what happened. One of them was that the period after World War II was unusual, not only in the United States, but in Western Europe. We had fought a war together, and fighting a war together had brought the country together and led to a level of cohesiveness that enabled the country to really grow together. And you see some aspects of that. Under President Eisenhower, Republican, the top marginal tax rate was 91%. And it was the period of our fastest economic growth. Now, can you imagine a politician today suggesting that we raise the tax rate to to 91%. Unimaginable. Yet, no evidence that it was bad for our economic growth. In fact, it was a period of very rapid economic growth. But there were other aspects of this period that are unusual, and I'll come back to talk about it again a little bit later. One of them was that we ended the wars with a debt-to-GDP ratio what we owe to our income, of 130%. And just to give you a frame of what that means, when Greece went into crisis in 2010, it had a debt-GDP ratio of 110. Now, did we say at the end of the war, oh, we're so indebted, we have to implode, do nothing, because we can't afford it? No, we said we have to grow. And if we grew enough, the debt would go down relative to GDP, and it did. That was a period where we said that everyone who had fought in the war, which was essentially every young man and a lot of women, could get a free 4-year college education at any school that they could get into, Harvard, Columbia, or the local community college, whatever they could get into, they could get a 4-year college education. Today, what do we say? Obama has proposed 2-year community college education for the poorest Americans, and many people are saying we can't afford it. That's nonsense. It's a matter of choice, and that's a theme I want to bring here. It's a matter of choice. We could afford it then, we can afford it now. We are much, much richer in the period after World War II for the next 75 years. We've grown a lot. So we are a much richer country. Our debt-to-GDP ratio has come down, and yet we are crying that we can't afford. I would say it's quite the opposite. We can't afford not to make this kind of education available to all. The second, so then this theory says that, well, as the time moves on, the effects of World War II weaken, and within 20, 30 years, the sense of solidarity that worked so well for our country evaporated. And that undermined our ability to work together. So that's one hypothesis. The other one was that we tried a new experiment. The 1970s was a period of some difficulty. There was oil price shocks. There was a period of stagflation, and some people misinterpreted what was going on and said we have to try a new economic model. And the theory was take away regulations that were restraining the economy, incentivize by lowering the taxes all the way down to, at the top, something like 30%. And that will motivate the economy and free the economy so it will grow faster. And yes, it will lead to more inequality because we've lowered the tax rates at the top, we've made our tax system less progressive, but everybody will be better off because the size of the pie will be bigger, and even if the people in the middle and the bottom get a smaller share percentage, the pie will be bigger and they'll be better off. That was the theory. It was called supply side. As an economist, I thought all the evidence was against it. There was no good theory and no evidence to support it. They even said that the supply response was going to be so great that lowering the taxes would increase tax revenue. That was the first thing that showed itself wrong. Well, we now have a third of a century of evidence on this experiment. And I gotta say, there's evidence you need that it's a failed experiment. But one part of the experiment that turned out to be consistent with what was forecast is inequality did grow. They were right about that. But in terms of what has happened to our population, people in the middle, the middle adjusted for inflation, is lower today than it was a quarter a century ago. And at the bottom, minimum wage, people at the bottom are receiving an income that's wages that are roughly equivalent to what they got 45 years ago. So how can you call our economy a successful economy if a majority of citizens have seen stagnation for a quarter of a century, if people at the bottom have seen no pay raise in a half century. This is a failed experiment. And one of the main messages is that we have to change. We have to try something else. Well, that's one important idea. A second important idea is it used to be thought that there was an important trade-off. Economists like to talk about trade-offs. That's what we do all the time in our courses. You get more of this, and you can give up that. And the basic idea in trade-offs was that, in this area was, yes, inequality was a bad thing, but you could only get more equality if you gave up on economic performance. And that was sometimes, it was called by Art Oken, who was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Johnson. He wrote a book called The Big Trade-Off. Well, we now know that that's not true. That in fact, you can get better economic performance if you have less inequality. That the two are complements, not substitutes for each other. This is not, let me make it clear, this is not just a fringe view on the left. This has now become a mainstream view. The IMF, the International Monetary Fund, which is not known to be exactly a radical organization, has for the last several years been championing this view that inequality is bad for economic performance. It leads to lower growth and more economic instability. It was one of the lessons that came out of the Great Crisis, the Great Recession in 2009. So that means if we construct our policies right, we can actually do better in both dimensions, both in inequality and in economic growth. One of the reasons that we've come to understand that there is this kind of complementarity relates to what I view as a fundamental American value, and that is equality of opportunity. When this debate about inequality started, there were some people like Paul Ryan who would say, we don't care about inequality of income or wealth, for obvious reasons. But what we care about, what America cares about, is equality of opportunity. Of course, he hadn't looked at the data, and what he didn't realize that America was among the worst of the advanced countries in terms of equality of opportunity. What that means is the life prospects of a young American are more dependent on the income and education of his parents than in other advanced countries. So I tell my students the important implication of this is there's one really important decision you have to make in your life, and that's choosing the right parents. And after you know that decision, it's all over. You might as well go home, as the expression goes. And this relationship between this fact that the American dream is a myth is related to another systematic finding, which is there is a relationship, a systematic relationship between the degree of inequality of income and wealth and the equality of opportunity. Systematic countries with more inequality of income have lower levels of equality of opportunity. So countries in Scandinavia, where they have a very high level of equality, have also much more opportunity than the equality of opportunity in the United States. And you can understand that one of the ways by which the opportunity is increased is through education. But in the United States, we spend more money even on public schools of the rich than we do in the public schools of the poor. And things have gotten worse. They've gotten worse in a couple of dimensions. One of them is the country has become more economically segregated. That means rich people live with rich, poor people live with poor. And if you have a school system based on where you live, local schools, that means if you're lucky and born in a rich community, you get good schools, and then if you're born in the others, you get poor schools. There's another thing that is also unusual about the United States is our university education is very expensive. And other countries have addressed the problem both by subsidizing tuition, bringing tuition down, and by giving income contingent loans. Australia is a program where every student gets a loan, but the amount they repay depends on their income. So it's never a hardship. They make sure it's never a hardship. And you may have to pay it over a longer period of time, but it never has the constraint enforcement that it does in the United States. Today, as many of you know, student debt is over $1 trillion, more than credit card debt. And the average college graduate has over a $25,000 debt. And if you go on to get a master's degree, $100,000, $200,000 is not unusual. And you can imagine what it does. The evidence is already there. It's changing when they can get married, when they can buy a home, whether they work a job they can take. They can't take a job that they want because of the overhang of debt. It's really affecting our society. So, those are some of the reasons that there is a connection between this inequality of income and the inequality of opportunity. Now, the fourth observation relates to the point I made earlier that inequality is not just a function of economic forces. Now, why do I say that? Well, if you look around the world in the advanced countries, almost all of them have the same forces at play. Changes in technology, changes in globalization. In Europe, the United States, Japan, Australia, they're all basically the same. And yet, America winds up with more inequality and lower levels of equality of opportunity. So why is the difference? The difference is basically because of the policies that we introduce. The policies are related to our politics. Now, when I say policies, what I mean is a very comprehensive view of those policies. I mentioned before tax policy, regulation policy, but it goes through, if you look at the entire legal structure, antitrust, competition policy. You have a monopoly. What do monopolies do? They raise prices. Well, prices go up and wages don't, real incomes go down. So if you have an economy with a lot of monopolies, the way incomes adjusted for inflation of workers are going to be lower. Our bankruptcy law gives describes what happens when something goes bankrupt. Well, first claim are derivatives, those risky products that AIG wrote. Bailout for one company, $180 billion. More than we spent on welfare for the poor over years and years and years we gave to one company. Again, the thing I said before, the question, we can't afford it. We said we could afford giving $180 billion to AIG, but we couldn't afford even giving health care to poor children who didn't have access to health care under President Bush. So there is a huge list of essentially every institution in our economy has some effect or other on inequality. One issue that's blown up recently is the policy of the Federal Reserve. The new Fed Janet Yellen, who's my student, gave a speech last October where she talked about inequality. And some people criticized her. When the Fed chairman was talking about cutting back Social Security, nobody criticized him as going over the bounds of the Federal Reserve. When he talked about all kinds of things, nobody criticized. But for somebody to talk about inequality, that says you're going outside your mandate. But the fact of the matter is, the Fed is one of the major reasons for our inequality. If every time unemployment goes up, the Fed every time wages go up a little bit, the Fed raises interest rates, creates more unemployment, it dampens wage increases, and it gets a ratchet effect of wages going down. For when the Fed engaged in QE, quantitative easing, but didn't fix our financial system, the flow of credit, what happened? The money didn't go to small and medium-sized enterprises, didn't go to make mortgages that much more available. It had a little bit of effect. I don't want to say it had none, but it didn't have much effect. Much of the money went to create a stock market bubble. And who benefited? Those who owned shares. And who was that? The people at the top. And we saw that in the data on wealth. The top 1% have recovered from the 2008-9 crisis. But the people at the bottom still have not recovered. So the point I want to get across is that every one of our rules and regulations help shape the economy. And if they're written in the wrong way, they shape it in ways that are both less dynamic and more unequal. And that's been what's happened since 1980. And this is a continual process. Congress is constantly passing laws, and each of these, and state legislatures as well, and each of these are shaping our economy, our society. Right now, a big issue that's up for discussion is the trade agreements, TPP. The president hoped to get it through without anybody noticing, but a few people started noticing. And I believe that if they pass that bill, it will increase inequality. It is basically giving more power to corporations and undermining that of workers, and will increase the great divide that already marks our country. In questions earlier, we maybe would talk about that. A couple final points I want to make very briefly. Because our policies are what drive inequality in the United States and made us so exceptional, it is politics that is the driver of inequality. And here's the real vicious circle. The more economic inequality you have, the more political inequality you're going to have. And that political inequality then leads to rules that lead to more economic inequality. So it's a reinforcing circle. So that I describe in the United States is that we become almost a country that is better described as $1 would vote than 1 person would vote. And if we continue this way, it'll become even more progressive. The more dollars you have, the more votes you get. I talked a lot about income at the top, but I want to emphasize that the inequality in the United States has affected every part of our society. It's not just the top. It's the increase in poverty, increased poverty at the bottom, and there's been an evisceration of the middle. Not only incomes in the middle have stagnated, those people who are trying to send their kids to college and facing medical emergency, there are lots of groups who are actually much worse off than they were. So the real concern is that what we used to think as the basic tenets, ingredients of a middle-class lifestyle are becoming increasingly difficult for large segments of our society. So let me conclude with 2 very brief remarks. The first is that these problems won't be solved by little tweaks in our policy framework. Politicians would like to point to one little thing or another. Those are typically symptomatic relief. Easy things that everybody could agree on. And even that is still surprising how difficult that I've said everybody will agree on. You can't get everybody on almost anything. But take the minimum wage. There'll be a lot of attention on minimum wage. I think it's really important. But that's a symptom of something that's more fundamentally wrong in our society. Why is it that in a society where productivity of workers has doubled in the last 35 years, wages have stagnated? That's not the way economies normally behave. Something's changed. And we have to understand why. And I believe it has to do with these power relationships and these the legal institutional framework that I described before. So what we need is a comprehensive approach, and an approach that not only addresses the underlying problems, but also provides the kind of symptomatic relief, because undoing what's happened over a third of a century is not going to happen overnight. And meanwhile, there's a lot at stake. The second concluding remark I want to make is there's some urgency. We've been undertaking this experiment for a third of a century, 30 35 years, and it hasn't worked. We have two paths going forward. One is, you might call it business as usual. Pretend that maybe something will happen to change things, but let's just go on, let's not rock the boat. We are, after all, better off than a lot of poor countries. And that's true. You know, I'd rather live here than in Liberia. So there are a lot that we can be thankful for. Let's just focus on the good news. Let's forget about all the bad news. The problem with this approach is that we are locking in inequality in our society, and growing inequality, for another generation. Because what we do now will affect us, our economy, our society, for decades to come. The other approach is to try to undertake real changes. I believe some of the real changes, and I describe some of these in my book, The Great Divide, that they can change the direction of our economy. It won't happen overnight. There's no magic bullet. It needs a comprehensive agenda. But I think if we do that, we can restore the American dream. And of course, you can know where of those two paths, which one I want to take. Thank you.
I'll just follow right on the last thing you said. There are changes that we can undertake to fix this. What are they? A few of the things we should be doing over the course of the next 20 years as a consistent direction development.
As I said, there's no magic bullet. One needs a comprehensive agenda. Some of the more obvious ones, you know, you might say the more where you can see the connections, obviously increasing minimum wage, improving the education system, moving away from the kind of education system that we have. But I want to talk a little bit about some of the more fundamental. Tomorrow we're having a big meeting tomorrow morning in Washington, where we're talking about the Roosevelt Institute, talking about rewriting the rules, looking at all the rules of our legal foundations. Mayor de Blasio is coming down, Elizabeth Warren. So it's hopefully going to be Bob Solo, who was a great Nobel Prize winner in economics, are all going to be down there. And we're going to try to put forward a whole agenda of rewriting the rules. So, for instance, one of the things that is very distinctive about American capitalism is that it's very short-term, very focused on quarterly returns. You got to ask, why is that? You know, what are the incentive structures that have led corporations to focus on the short term rather than the long term? And this short term focus has real consequences. So rather than investing in people, which are long term investments, you buy back shares. And that means there are no jobs being created. You'd rather keep your money offshore rather than bring it back to the United States. So that's just one example of trying to get rid of the short-termism. Another one is the excessive financialization of our economy. Our economy used to have the percentage of GDP that was in the financial sector was under 3%. Before that crisis, it got up to 8%. Did it perform its functions any better? No, it actually was taking money from the rest of the economy, and it was not allocating capital better. It was doing a worse job. It was not managing risk. It was not running the payment system in a way corresponding to what a 21st century technology would allow. So we have a whole set of proposals about reforming the financial system. So it's a fairly comprehensive agenda on our legal framework. On the tax side, there's one other thing. It's not just the progressivity of the taxes. Let me just make one more point. You know, a lot of people who talk about inequality focus on redistribution. A lot of what we're talking about is the distribution of income before taxes and transfers, how our economic system lowers wages and increases the share of profits. So it changes the market distribution. But the tax system is not only the degree of progressivity, there are all kinds of special provisions. In fact, our tax system is unusual in that it's regressive. The people in the top 0.1% pay a lower percentage of their income in taxes than people whose income is much lower. And that's because of special provisions for capital gains, dividends, and these have the effect of distorting our economy rather than making our economy more efficient.
I'm just going to jump in. If you do want to ask a question, please join one of the queues, either to the right or the left of Professor Stiglitz, and we'll take our next question naturally from the left of Professor Stiglitz.
I'm here on the left, trying to remember my questions from when I got out. But you haven't really addressed the Congress in the situation now. We see a regressive conservative Congress. We have one candidate in particular who is coming from the socialist side. We have a lot of votes here in this room. I mean, but our congressman is conservative. What do you expect is going to happen next?
So I was talking mostly about the policies that led to inequality. And I did point out that rules make a big difference for the way it does, and that there's this connection between political inequality and economic inequality. But just like economic rules shape the economy, political rules shape the politics. And that's where money has even a more invidious effect because it shapes the politics. So, the last election cost $2 billion to candidates. This next election is going to cost, they estimate 2 to 3 times that amount. When people make campaign contributions, these are not like charitable contributions. These are investments. And they expect when the banks make an investment, give a contribution, they expect a return. And unfortunately, they do get a return. And in fact, the banks got a better return on their political investments than they did on their financial investments. They didn't know how to manage their financial investments, but the returns they got on their political investments were fantastic. So that's why the only way, in the end, I believe, to check this is by grassroots political movements to restore democracy, undermine the power of money, and change the political rules to make us move away from this $1 one vote towards more one person one vote.
Thank you.
My question is about the trade agreements, past ones and the one that's being discussed now. The argument that I've heard is that we would have lost all these jobs anyhow, and therefore can't blame NAFTA and GATT for the great loss of jobs. And the same will be true in this future trade agreement. We might lose jobs, or we lose those jobs anyhow. So my question is, can you tell us the degree of jobs that we lost because of things like technology and other forces in the world economy versus these trade agreements? That's what I'm interested in hearing.
Sure. Our understanding of this issue has actually changed a lot in the last 15 years. Prior to that, I think the general view was technology was the more important driver of what was going on. But in the last 15 years, the evidence is that it's increasingly trade that's driven it. And let me just give you one example of a study that I think is viewed as one of the most widely cited out of MIT, where they looked at counties that produced goods where there was a surge of imports from China. And what they found is in those particular places that were producing goods that were competing with Chinese goods, unemployment was higher and wages were lower. so that there is a direct effect of trade. Now, my own feeling about the new trade agreements, TPP, is that what I just said is important, but it's not the most important part of these trade agreements. The most important part of these trade agreements has nothing to do with trade. That inside the trade agreements, there are two other parts. One has to do with intellectual property, the ability to get generic medicines. We had a compromise in our country between generic medicines, which produce medicines at a low price, and big pharma, which doesn't do so much innovation, because that really goes on in the universities, but brings the goods to the market in the first place. So it was a compromise where we said we have to have both of these. So in the Hatch-Waxman Act, we gave, the outcome of the Hatch-Waxman Act was about 87% of our current drugs are generics. And if it weren't for that, our drug prices would be over the roof. Well, that compromise, that was widely debated in Congress, and as I say, some people think it was wrong. We should have had more of a role for generics, and that would have brought down our price. The big pharma has, I was going to say bought, and that's probably a more accurate description, but gotten the U.S. government, the USTR, to try to undo that balance, to make it much more difficult to have generics, both in the United States and abroad. And the effects of this can be absolutely devastating. The USTR basically believes the stronger the intellectual property rights, the better. And intellectual property rights are an example of a kind of rules that make a difference. It's giving a monopoly power for a certain period of time. Now, an example of how bad this goes, we have, we don't always get clean examples, but there one interesting example that I think tells a lot. It's really important, and that is there was a patent on BRCA genes. These two genes that if you have it, the probability of getting breast cancer is over 50%. So you want to know whether you have these. Now you probably thought you owned your genes, but about 10 years ago or so, maybe a little longer now, the U.S. Patent Office gave the patent for your genes, for that BRCA gene, to Myriad, a Utah company. And it wanted to maximize profits, not to save lives. So it charged a very high price. And then Yale came along and said, we have a better test whether you have the gene, and with some NGOs, they were willing to give it for free. What was the response of Myriad? No way. The result of that is people died. Their test was inferior. It gave the wrong results. It was very expensive, so people without insurance couldn't afford it. And many people died as a result of that. Well, then, 2 years ago, the ACLU and a number of other groups sued. And I joined the suit as an economist, saying this would be good for the economy. It would be good for innovation. We won in the district court. These legal cases are always an ups and downs. We won in the district courts. We lost in the appellate court, and finally we won in the Supreme Court. Today, as a result of that, the price of the test has come down more than 90%. And the quality of the test has gone up. So this would not have been available if intellectual rights of property had remained tight. The Supreme Court had to make the decision. And the USTR has this view that the tighter the intellectual property rights, the better. So for me, I find it absolutely understandable. Obama's signature achievement is Obamacare, which is supposed to bring down prices, and here he's pushing something that will raise prices. Now, the other part is the investment agreement. The investment agreement is designed to make it more difficult for companies to regulate, for governments, countries, to regulate the environment, health, safety, even the financial sector, even the economy. And it does this through a judicial system that is privatized, very expensive. So just to give you how bad this stuff is, these are not hypothetical problems. Uruguay is being sued now. Uruguay did something. They said that cigarettes are bad for your health. Not a big discovery. It then went on and said you have to label packages of cigarettes saying they're bad for your health. Again, not really unusual. They did something that many countries do, but the United States doesn't do. They put a picture of what your lungs look like after you smoke cigarettes. That was pretty graphic. And guess what? It worked. Smoking went down. But under this kind of provision that the USTR is trying to put in these agreements, Philip Morris is suing Uruguay and Australia, saying they're losing profits because they're not killing as many people as they used to. And the Uruguay government has to compensate them for the lost expected profits that they would have gotten from killing people. Now, if you think that's ridiculous, you're right. And that's what Obama is trying to push. And that's what Elizabeth Warren is trying to stop. Now, the U.S. says, oh, there have only been 19 cases or 13 cases, and we haven't lost one yet. But you don't change a legal system on the basis of a hope and a prayer. And moreover, American corporations are very bright. An American corporation like Philip Morris, if it wants to sue U.S. government, what can it do? Those of you lawyers know. You just create a subsidiary in a foreign country, make your investment in the United States through your foreign subsidiaries, and then you can sue the U.S. government. Now, one more point. These legal costs are so high that Uruguay can't afford it. So Mayor Bloomberg and some other wealthy Americans are paying Uruguay's legal fees. Now, can you imagine the situation where rich Americans have to pay to make sure that Uruguayans don't die from America's trade laws? So, anyway, now if you understand why I'm against TPP, I hope you...
Just one quick follow-up. What's your theory of why Obama would support this?
Campaign contributions.
Campaign contributions.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
Maybe Professor Stiglitz, Michael Grace, I'm a GS student, just graduated from Columbia as well. Two quick things. In the Economics Department at Columbia, as well as in the Political Science Department at Columbia, the definition of income redistribution is as such where they teach that $1 goes out of your hand and into someone lesser's hand, which really isn't the case. And I brought this up in class and I put it up on the big board. The idea is that income redistribution, the definition should be broadened or at least changed from that idea to something where it is more societal, where it goes into a pool that society benefits from. And Professor Kumar and I agreed on this, but how it's taught is not that. So we have 19 and 20-year-olds thinking that income redistribution, the model is taught at an economics department at Columbia and the political science department, where it's $1 coming out of my pocket into some poor schmuck's hands, which isn't truly the case at all. The other thing I wanted to ask you is that the system of how we pay for education itself, you brought up before. Public schools are financed by property taxes, and full disclosure here, I am running for the assembly in New Jersey, and I'm proposing that that be changed and scrapped completely, that property taxes are a horrible way to pay for public school systems. It should be distributed amongst the entire populace of working people. Your thoughts on that, please, on both those things.
Well, the reason I emphasized in my talk the distribution of income before taxes and transfers is to emphasize that really what we're doing is shaping how we're dividing the national income pie. Or to put it, the case where you see this most dramatically is the laws that affect, the incentives affecting dividing corporate income. Corporations get a certain amount of income, and the question is how much of that goes to the CEO, how much to workers, and how much to investment. And the short-termism, the set of tax rules, the set of disclosures, all of these have reshaped the way the money goes. More of it goes to the 1%, the CEO, and less of it goes to workers and investment. And so it's actually, I say it's not a zero sum, it's a negative sum, because we're investing less and it'll be less in the future. On the other issue, very briefly, I think the system of local taxation supporting public education is broken. It is one of the main reasons why we have this inequality of opportunity that we have. And we have to have some system of ensuring that we do better at making sure that we have equality of opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, Professor. I'm curious if you think that taking away subsidies from the big industries would actually significantly help economic equality.
Well, most of the industries that get subsidies don't deserve them. And some of them, it's really negative. So if you look at when I was in the Clinton administration, one of the exercises that we did that was sort of fun, we formed a list of corporate welfare, the corporations that were getting big payments. I should say that one of the members of our administration got furious whenever I used the word, or Bob Rice used the word corporate welfare. You could probably figure out who that was. But I thought it summarized a lot of what was going on. Some of that is really bad. So, for instance, a lot of the corporate welfare is hidden in tax laws, so you don't even see it. So the more transparent things that we welfare are agricultural subsidies, which go overwhelmingly to very big corporate farms. Overwhelmingly. We started with a family farm economy, and that's what it was sold as, but that's not the American economy of the 21st century. The $700 billion that went mostly to the financial sector was another big subsidy. And it's not the first bailout of the banks. I mean, we have bailouts all the time. And we usually give a name, like we have the Mexican bailout, the Korean bailout. This is all, one of the important things in public policy that we teach is always make a name that's different from the reality. So it wasn't a bailout of Mexico, it was the bailout of American banks. It wasn't a bailout of Indonesia, it was a bailout of American banks and some European banks as well. So, and the third, the most invidious one are subsidies to the coal and oil companies that are in our tax laws. And they're polluting our atmosphere, and we're paying them to pollute our atmosphere and bring on global warming. Everybody agrees that if we just got rid of the carbon subsidies, we would have a better environment and have a lot more to spend on better things, including things that would create more equality.
Please give Elizabeth Warren a high five tomorrow.
Hi, good evening. I'm an adjunct here in political science at BCC. And my specialty is in future studies, which is basically you're looking at trends that could possibly happen in future politics. Right? And one of the things that we really look at is the end of growth, right? The concept of we're seeing things like automation coming down the line, where the lower jobs may disappear, and actually even some middle-class jobs, where you're having robots that can be lawyer temps and such, right? And nurses. That the very nature of how our economy works 50 years from now, the very concept of growth, especially obviously, of course, with global warming and other environmental issues, that may not be possible. And so I guess what I'm doing is I'm making a statement here that I would like you to sort of react to. Why aren't, I know that obviously even just getting people to talk about income inequality is hard enough, but why aren't you trying to push the envelope a little more even? That we are seeing issues coming down the pipeline, and we didn't talk about income inequality until, frankly, it was almost too late. We should be talking about these things now rather than waiting another 20, 30 years.
Yeah, no, I agree. Although there is a beginning of a conversation about the problem of whether we are going to have a productivity slowdown, whether technology is going to change, whether we'll be able to create new jobs. because of urbanization. I think these are real significant issues. One aspect of that I think is, part of the way that debate has traditionally gone is that the techno-optimists point out that after, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th century, we invented the car. People said, oh, we're going to lose buggy whip makers and all that, and we created more jobs. But modern technology is very different. Not only are these machines stronger, they actually they think faster. They don't have all the thinking capacities that we have, but a lot of the things they do, we can't do. So it is naive to assume that it is automatically going to be the case that we will make a smooth transition. So I think it is something that is important to continue to discuss.
Hi, Doctor. How are you? Hope it doesn't come from the fact that I'm left-handed. A couple of things. First of all, you talked about education, the importance of education, and I agree with you completely. Unfortunately, I feel like there's been so much emphasis on younger people getting education that the powers that be, the movers and the shakers, whatever, are given a free ride. Many of them haven't updated their education in years, and they've become very isolated. Two things. A number of years ago, I put my thoughts down. I came up with something I call the contemporary education certificate, basically to make the fat cats go back periodically to school to get kind of recertified. And give you this now, maybe you can get it. The other thing I wanted to ask is elections. What can we do to energize the people? Because people are so turned off that they feel that it doesn't matter that they vote or get involved. And, I'm wondering, maybe you could offer some suggestions of what could be done.
I guess this is going to be the last question, or one more. Okay. Yeah, I think the issue of lifelong learning is really important, and making access to lifelong learning and the capabilities of lifelong learning is very important. This is one area where I'm a little bit optimistic about some of the changes, some of the internet developments, courses like Coursera, Khan Academy, and all of that are making some of these lifelong learning processes more accessible. The second issue I am actually very depressed about, and that is the last election. As in the 2010 election, voter turnout was very low, and particularly youth voter turnout was very low. I might say youth have the greatest stake in the future of the country. They ought to really be out there voting, because what happens, who they elect, is going to determine what's going to happen for years to come, and they have the greatest stake. But the way our politics is run, it's reflected in several of the questions that have been asked. Their feeling is it won't make any difference. The 1% is still going to be running it, or that kind of mentality. And I guess I just want to share the view that I still am an optimistic Westerner, and I do think that these changes are possible if voters turn out, if there's enough civil society. And I have some reason for that optimism, in the sense that we've moved inequality on top of the agenda. There is a national movement to increase the minimum wage. Yes, 70% of Americans support it, and we couldn't get it through Congress, which is a broken system in Washington. But in Seattle and cities all over the country, there is things are moving, and so that there is in that, I think, a real sense of optimism.
One last question for the professor, and then I think afterwards it's going to be signing books for us.
You've touched on a little bit of this previously, but this is perhaps a little more long-term. Over a generation ago, a fellow named Tom Watson Jr., who was the chairman of IBM, looked to the future and said, there will come a time when there will no longer be jobs available, that we will have to provide everybody in the country with their needs, and those people who needed to work, we would have to find out some way to give them perhaps artificial means to work. Now, perhaps he was premature, but some of that seems to be starting now.
First, let me tell you a little story. There was an occasion when they had a GM. This was many years ago. Was when the automation was just beginning. Was walking around one of the auto plants in Detroit with the head of the union, and he saw all the machines making the cars, and he said, the president of GM said to the head of the union, these guys never go on strike. And what's going to happen to your union? And the head of the union replied, and who's going to be buying your cars? So the point, actually Keynes wrote a very famous paper, a very similar thing about economic legacy of our grandchildren. Made a very important point that, let me put it somewhat differently, that for the history of mankind until about 1750, 1800, incomes were exactly constant, productivity was constant, and then beginning about 1750, 1800, as a result of the Enlightenment and scientific method and technology, income started to soar. It used to be that we needed all our time to produce the food we needed, the shelter, clothing, and then we needed less and less and less. And now we only need a few hours a week to produce the basic necessities of life. And what Keynes asked is, what are we going to do with the rest? And now you're imagining what would happen if we continue where we don't use any time. I don't think we're going to get to that extreme. But the valid question, what's going to happen? And there are two answers. We can either have a more constructive leisure, or we can consume more and more goods. Now, I happen to think that the first course is better, particularly if you want to save the planet. But it's interesting, over the last 50 years, Europe has gone one way. They actually enjoy more leisure and more goods, but more leisure. And we've gone the other way. We actually consume less leisure than we did 40 years ago, and a lot more goods. I don't think our approach is sustainable.
Thank you very much.
Professor Stiglitz make it to the back of the room where he will sign autographed books for those of you who wish to buy it.